Hi, I'm Dennis Wilson, the Missoula Creation Forum. This is our first program. Some of you have seen me around town. I've been the Missoula Creation gadfly for years, especially at the university. We're sponsored debates with the Missoula Creationists, forums, and other kinds of informal things and formal things throughout the community here. And we'd like to welcome you to this, our flagship presentation. And we expect it to be a little rough because of our initial time here, but if you'll bear with us, we believe that you're going to learn something that will be of surprising interest to you. We all wonder from our earliest years about the origin of things, from butterflies to dirt clods to people. Where do these things come from? Television and movies, for the most part, tell us that things evolve by natural chance occurrence over billions of years of time. The story is told over and over again of how in the beginning a great cosmic egg exploded and gases flashed across the universe. Over billions of years of time, those gases of hydrogen coalesced into stars and planets and butterflies and children. And on the other side of the coin, we've been told since we were youthful people that on our mother's knees that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. How do you bring those two things together? How does one begin to understand all the complexities of the world around him? Some of us have begun to merge those two ideas. But the problem is, as we merge them, we find that the naturalistic explanation, because of the constant bombardment of television and the printed page, wins out over the feelings that we had as a child. And we begin to wonder whether, in fact, God exists at all. And with the Missoula Creationist Forum, we hope to show you that there is legitimate scientific reason to believe what the Bible says in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. Jeremy, you had some of these experiences of, in your life of being taught one thing at home and discovering from the media something quite different, something quite foreign to what you were taught at home?
Yes, I have.
Well, we've put together a series of questions here today to ask in kind of a student-teacher format, and we would like you to just listen in as we go through these things, and hopefully you'll learn something as we explore some of these things. Let's go ahead and have it.
Dennis, why is the study of origins important?
Well, the chemist, Dr. George Wald, said this some years ago. 400 years ago, an aggregate of molecules named Shakespeare produced a play called Hamlet. That's the world that we've found ourselves put into. Man is beginning to reduce the view of himself down to molecules and atoms, just chance occurrences. You know, while the evolutionist doesn't like to admit it, all the major philosophies that have haunted our day really stem from creation versus evolution. For example, Adolf Hitler was a staunch evolutionist. His eugenics program, he wanted to produce the master race, of course. His eugenics program was based right out of the creation-evolution debate. If Hitler had not set out to produce an Aryan super race, he would never have destroyed the Jews. He would never have decided that he needed to eliminate an inferior race. And let's consider Marx and communism. While evolutionists would again find this tremendously discouraging and disgusting for me to talk this way, we believe that even Marx and his communism could be put at the doorstep of Darwin and evolution, simply because Marx wanted no God in heaven, and Darwin provided that avenue for him. So much so that Marx asked Darwin to sign the first copy of his book, Das Kapital. Darwin turned him down because Darwin was too much of a capitalist to do that, but it was important to him that Marx flattered him with this attention. And then the robber barons of a few years ago, with the child labor and people being chained to cotton gins for hours at a time. These men who built the railroads and put found the oil in the ground and built the steel mills, many of them believed in the survival of the fittest. And therefore they felt that they were the fittest and they could put children to work and others weaker than them. So origins is a very important subject. It tells us a lot about what we are like. Young people today seem to think that the greatest thrill in life is to either get high on drugs or to be involved in some kind of crime or drive-by shootings, things like this. They're cynical and remorseless in many ways. That's because they don't believe there's a God in heaven anymore. And much of that can be attributed to a long-term effect of the lack of creationism in their life. There is no God in their heaven anymore. No God, no meaning. They can create their own rules and do what they want to do.
But hasn't evolution been proven, at least since the Scopes monkey trial?
Well, I'd like to show you a picture of the actual Missoulian that was published at the time of the Scopes trial. This is actually a reprint by the Missoulian, but you notice the original date was July 22nd, 1925. And it says, Scopes is found guilty, appeal to be made. And that's the strange thing, Jeremy, that people don't realize. By and large, John Scopes was actually found guilty of teaching evolution in Tennessee in 1925. And the reason he was found guilty is because he'd broken the law. The ACLU had gotten a hold of this young man, who was actually a math teacher, not a science teacher at all. And they paid him to sue the state of Tennessee to break their evolution creationism law. Now, we've all seen Inherit the Wind, and we've listened to the movie, and we see there Clarence Darrow and his tremendous and brilliant arguments against sort of a fuddy-duddy William Jennings Bryan. The creationists always look silly in these things. And that was, in fact, their attempt. Journalists such as H.L. Mencken, who wrote many of the stories coming from the Scopes trial, tried to make it out to be that the creationists were all foolish and the evolutionists were the intelligent people. And the truth was that it worked out exactly the opposite. You see, the evolutionist argument was based a great deal on a particular ancient man that they called at that time Hesperopithecus. Hesperopithecus was also called Nebraska man. Now, the evolutionists don't like us to remember this as creationists, but they are stuck with this. The truth is they found a tooth in Nebraska. And that tooth, they said, was part of an ancient man. And they even put pictures of him, artistic pictures, on the cover of the London Times. Well, the truth was that in the end, anthropologists discovered that tooth again. And this time it was in the jaw of an ancient peccary, a pig. So the evidence for the Scopes monkey trial was really false. They also used the Piltdown hoax, which is even more of a false hoax. It was actually something someone had put together. They'd taken a human skull and put a monkey's jaw on that. It was discovered in Piltdown, England, and that was the total evidence at that time of the Scopes trial. Since that time, the evidence is still just as hard to find anywhere. Let's, for example, look at the testimony of two very leading scientists. The first, Dr. Dean Kenyon. Dr. Kenyon is the head of biology at San Francisco State University. Here's what he has to say about the evidence regarding evolution. Dean Kenyon has been at times a member of NASA and was in fact part of NASA's exobiology team. He's an author of biotic predestination. Here's what Dr. Kenyon has to say. More and more professional scientists holding evolutionary views are beginning to take the creationist scientific challenge seriously. There continues, however, to be widespread misunderstanding in the scientific community concerning just what creation science is. Many have considered it to be simply religion in disguise and have chosen to shun it altogether. This situation is regrettable and exhibits a degree of close-mindedness quite alien to the spirit of true scientific inquiry. It's apparent to me that the creationist challenge to evolutionism is indeed formidable, and I no longer believe that the arguments in my book and others and similar books by other authors add up to an adequate defense of the view that life arose spontaneously on this planet from non-living matter. That's a quote from Dr. Kenyon. Then we have the quote from Dr. Patterson. Dr. Patterson is the senior paleontologist at the British Museum, and he's editor of their journal. And he said this in a speech to the American Museum of Natural History in 1981. He says, "It's true that for the last 18 months or so, I have been kicking around non-evolutionary or anti-evolutionary ideas. One of the reasons I started taking this anti-evolutionary view, or let's call it a non-evolutionary view, was last year I had a sudden realization that for over 20 years, I had thought I was working on evolution in some way. One morning I woke up and something had happened, and it had struck me in the night that I had been working on this stuff for 20 years, and there was not one thing that I knew about it. That's quite a shock, to learn that one can be so misled so long. Either there was something wrong with me, or there was something quite wrong with evolutionary theory. Naturally, I know there was nothing wrong with me. So for the last few weeks, I've tried putting a simple question to various people. And the question he kept asking was this: can you name one thing, one certain thing that evolutionists can say is true? And even though he went to the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago and various other leading institutions of higher learning throughout the United States and Europe, there was not one person who could answer him with something that they knew for a fact to be proven by evolutionary theory. Now, Jeremy, you tell me, do you think that there's any real evidence for evolution?
Probably not. Isn't there... What about the origin of life? I heard once that life has almost been made in a test tube, though. What about that?
Well, it's real interesting. Let me refer you again to the blackboard here. This is a schematic drawing of the Urey-Miller experiment, very famous experiment. Dr. Urey was in fact at one time part of the University of Montana. He had a graduate student by the name of Stanley Miller. And Stanley Miller had known for some time that the evolutionists believe that the atmosphere of the ancient primitive Earth must be a reducing atmosphere. A reducing atmosphere is one that has no oxygen in it and very little other sorts of chemicals that can produce oxygen. The reason for that is that the chemicals that are required for things like proteins and amino acids cannot be made in an oxygenated atmosphere because they are oxygenized and they turn into a kind of a mud. So therefore, there had to be a reducing atmosphere. Now, it's very interesting that all of the ancient sediments that we look at have ferric, that is iron oxide organisms in the soils, showing that those things grew and died and lived in oxygen. But still, let's assume for the moment that Urey-Miller were correct, that the reducing atmosphere was true. Well, here we have a schematic, as I said before. In this vessel, we have water. The water is heated. The steam generates through the system to make the system work. Now, in this vessel, we have supposedly the primitive reducing atmosphere. And as you see, there is a spark that's generated through this. Now, the spark would be lightning. And they tried to model the ancient atmosphere. And lo and behold, they came up with 2 amino acids. And that lightning bit of information was spread throughout all the world. Now, living things require at least 20 different amino acids. They produce 2 of the most simple amino acids. Now, amino acids, what are they? Amino acids are like the pearls on a necklace. The necklace is a protein molecule, and each one of the pearls on the necklace is an amino acid. And so, of course, many proteins are required to produce the living cell. And they thought to themselves, well, given enough time, you could produce the first cell by this method. The fact is, though, that over the years, the scientists have tried again and again and again to duplicate this experiment, and all they ever get are the most simple amino acids, never any of the most complicated ones that are required. And furthermore, the problem is that when you try to do something like introduce other molecules like DNA, the control molecules of the cell, into this system, the two things work against each other. You can't have DNA and make protein. You can't make protein and have DNA. The two things will not fit together chemically. So no, life has not been made in a test tube, and it becomes more complex rather than more simple to do so.
Aren't there other possibilities besides creation or evolution?
Well, one of the most greatest scientists living today is Dr. Watson of Watson and Crick fame. He is one of the co-discoverers of the DNA molecule. The DNA, of course, is the molecule we mentioned up here, the control molecule of every cell. And Dr. Watson believes in panspermia. Panspermia means that the spacemen or something from space seeded our country, our universe, our world. He has to say that because he knows that you cannot, by this sort of biology, produce life on this planet. And he should know. But he also says it's foolish to think that there could be anything else beside either a creator creating or the natural world producing things in a natural way. It's either one or the other. He has said this on numerous occasions. He's very much against the creator, and so therefore he believes that maybe alien beings made us.
How about man? Don't scientists have good evidence that man evolved from ape-like ancestors?
Well, that, of course, is the most important question of all, isn't it, Jeremy? Did man evolve? And even in one of the most recent issues of Time magazine, this is the March issue, we have on the cover a picture of another one of these artistic renditions. The same thing that happened in the days of Hesperopithecus and all of the other ancient creatures that supposedly mark the evolutionists' evidence for all of what they say. Now then, let's think about this for a minute. You've heard about Lucy, no doubt. Mm-hmm. The name Lucy came when Dr. Johansen was working in Ethiopia trying to find the missing link, the earliest pre-human ancestor of man. And he discovered he discovered 40%, not 60%, 40% of a skeleton. 60% was missing. He thought this thing, which was about 3 feet tall, had a brain case the exact same size as the chimpanzee. He thought it had some bone structure that was much more bipedal, that is, it walked upright. And he got very excited, and the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, was on his tape recorder at that time, and so he decided, yes, indeed, I will call this Lucy. Well, of course, it had to have a fancy name, otherwise, you know, the rest of us could know what it was all about. So they began to call it Australopithecus afarensis. Australopithecus. Now, that's a very interesting name all by itself, because Australo means southern, Pithecus is ape. So they knew what it was. It was a southern ape. They called it that. Well, anyway, it was only 3 feet tall. It was about the size of a chimp. And they said it walked upright. Now, this is a big problem. Think about this for a moment, Jeremy. What is the last thing that develops in a child? Your family's had many children. What's the last thing that develops in a baby? His walking, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, the whole evolutionary scenario is that even in the womb, we go through some of the transformations that occur in the process of development and evolution. Well, a child comes out able to think fairly well. His mind is well developed, but his legs are the last thing to develop. Well, here we have Lucy, and the biggest evidence for Lucy and all the way up the ladder, suppose, of human evolution is bipedal locomotion, the ability to walk. Now, well, let's look at the next notch up. The next one is called Homo erectus. Let me write some of these things on the board for us. Homo is man, erectus means erect man. Now, the reason, of course, that they called him Homo erectus is they thought he could stand upright. Now, Homo erectus was found in two places. In the number one place was Java, the island of Java, and the other place was Beijing, or near Beijing. At that time, it was called Peking. And so he's still called Peking man to this day. Peking man supposedly was able to walk upright. Now, let's talk a little bit about Homo erectus in terms of Java man. Java man is back in the news again, by the way. And Java man was found by a man by the name of Eugene Dubois. Eugene Dubois, or Dubois, was a Dutchman, actually, who decided from classes with another very strong evolutionist by the name of Ernst Haeckel, probably the Darwin of Germany and Austria, that he should go and look for the missing link. And so for some reason, unbeknownst to anybody but Eugene, he chose to go out to the island of Java. Why Java? Maybe it was a nice vacation. I don't know. But at any rate, he went out there and he dug around, and it wasn't more than a few months later that he announced to the whole world, and it electrified the world, that he had discovered what was called Pithecanthropus at that time. Pithecanthropus. That name came from Ernst Haeckel, the German teacher. And Ernst Haeckel wired him and said, from the discoverer of Pithecanthropus to its actual uncoverer, greetings. You know, he took credit for it, even though Dubois had found it. At any rate, what it was there was a skull cap. It looked something like this, and a femur bone, which is a long bone of the leg. And that's all. That's all the evidence he found. Now remember Hesperopithecus, the pig tooth. Well, at any rate, the skull cap, to all the experts, the skull cap looked legitimate. I mean, it looked like it was of a giant ape of some kind, probably a giant gibbon. But the femur was obviously a human femur. So they put two and two together and thought, well, maybe it could walk well. Again, we get to this walking thing. That's all the evidence they had. The fact is, though, that Dubois never did tell anyone, and it didn't come out till many years later, that he found 10 complete human skeletons in the same dig. And so we wonder where that femur bone came from. We know that skull cap was certainly simian or ape-like, but the bone was certainly human-like. And on his deathbed, Dubois made a great deal of change to his story, including the 10 human skeletons. And then, of course, we have the issue of Peking. The Peking skeletons were supposedly found in a cave. Now, it was more like a hole than a cave, but anyway, they called it a cave. And they found a series of skeletons there with the frontal lobe, skulls only, just skulls, the frontal lobes bashed out, and the brains missing, as though they'd been eaten. And there was another place nearby that was a cave. And those were complete human skeletons. It was as though the humans had taken the skulls, eaten them, and thrown them in their garbage pit, and later we anthropologists had come along and discovered the garbage pit. Well, to make a long story short, they made all sorts of claims about Peking man, and they made models of Peking man, and that's all we have today, Jeremy, is the models. And the reason is because the United States Marine Corps, of all things, lost the original fossils. They were on a train. They were locked in a case, supposedly, and they were on their way out of China, and they vanished from thin air. No one knows to this day what happened to those. Well, I don't know about you, Jeremy, but I have a problem with this, because here they have done this with Hesperopithecus and Piltdown man, which fooled the best authorities in the world from the 1920s to the 1950s. In fact, 300 people won their PhDs in studies of Piltdown man. 300 people that taught in universities and also made more discoveries. Well, to make a long story short, the next step up the line is supposedly Homo Neanderthalis, the Neanderthal man. Neanderthal man today is not even in the American Museum of Natural History. They took him out because he's so much like modern man that you can't distinguish him unless you're an expert. In fact, there are some people that look like Homo Neanderthalis today. Some people think I look like Homo Neanderthalis today. And finally, we have Cro-Magnon man. And Cro-Magnon has a larger brain case on the average than you or I. So he probably was superior to us, not inferior. These, in fact, were men. They walked upright, and they were Homo sapiens. It just goes to show us all of us, that the whole evolution thing is based upon very faulty presuppositions. From the origin of life to the formation of man, there seems to be a great deal of questions. And the data is not something that creationists and evolutionists fight over. We know what the data is. It's the interpretation of the data. You can take the same interpretations, you can make stories that are evolutionary, you can tell the stories about the Great Bang and the hydrogen racing out into space, or you can take that and turn it around and test it against the tried and true works of God. The Bible has been around long before science. And while science has changed and changed and changed and changed, the Bible has remained the same, unchanging. There's a great creationist, Ken Ham, who always and forever is saying, "Were you there?" He says this to the evolutionist. Were you there? That's a good question, because it's the only way to know for certain. But we know that God was there, and there is nothing in science that in any way brings into question the plain teaching of the book of Genesis. Well, we'd like you to stay tuned for the next weeks and months for as we get this thing off and running. We'll be dealing with various subjects in the creationist and evolutionist debate. We'll be talking about things like the age of the earth. We'll go into more depth about the origin of human life. We'll go into more depth about the origin of life and many other things. The lack thereof, fossils are the lack thereof. And we would ask that you would come and join us on a weekly basis. Thanks a lot.